Year after year we celebrate Heritage Day, we braai, we drink a lot. But that doesn't really go to the heart of what Heritage Day should be about. It seems to have lost its meaning over the years. How do you think we work towards regaining that?
I think what we need to do as a nation, as many peoples in this country, is to do an introspection about who we are, in terms of our cultures, our languages, our different religions, and say to ourselves, shouldn't we be celebrating those different languages? There are more than 11. 11 are only in the Constitution. If you look at the Constitution, there's no Gujarati, for example. There are other languages, all of them, celebrating them, and ensuring that those languages are taught from birth and to the highest, and they are used daily. But if we develop our languages, we are setting ourselves. We develop our cultures, protect those cultures, and not allow anyone to look down upon our cultures. It doesn't matter what they are. Develop our religions and protect our religions. And as between all those things, ensure that no language is contemptuous of others or want to dominate other languages. That all languages are respected, all religions are respected, and all cultures are developed and respected. But that is the beginning of wisdom in nation building. The Freedom Charter says all languages shall be equal before the law. All cultures, all religions. And that's, to some extent, went into our Constitution. And we should accept that Constitution, which is the framework of our existence today in South Africa. And of course, one must go further than those issues and go to the issue of gender and ensure that there's no gender discrimination. Of course, race, there's no racial discrimination, goes on and on. And as we braai, like we have got a tendency to braai and drink alcohol, we should assert our being South Africa. We are a tapestry, a beautiful tapestry of different cultures, languages, and religions. And also we've got men and women who want to be asserted, and they must all be asserted. You cannot have a culture that oppresses women. It's wrong. You cannot have a culture that abuses children. It's wrong. So we must develop a culture of discipline and respect amongst ourselves as human beings.
You've said something very important there about our heritage and the Constitution. Wouldn't you say that in some ways, coming from a history of several patriarchal societies that are now living together as one, societies perhaps that were initially highly tribalistic or racist, in nature. If that is part of our heritage, how do we marry that with the modernity and advancement in the Constitution that sometimes requires us to rebel against that heritage?
I think we should rebel against all forms of racism. Doesn't matter whether it's white racism or black racism. Racism is colorless and is backward, and we must reject that. Our Constitution is against that. We should rebel, even with more vigor, against tribalism. Throughout Africa, tribalism has been eating away the unity of nations. So we should guard against any forms, any manifestation of tribalism in South Africa and rebel against it and assert our oneness. If we're Africans, whether you're white, we're all human beings, we're all South Africans, and that makes us equal. All of us must not fall in the trap of sparrowing around us, if you get what I mean. Making racial statements and for which we don't take responsibility and which are out of place. But even all of us should not allow ourselves to be mirrored and have the sparrows being the standard of behavior for us. We should set a higher standard of behavior. Of course, we tend to sensationalize these things because people are traumatized by racism and they should be traumatized by tribalism as well. Whether it's tribalism in the highest office in this country or in any part of the administration, it is tribalism, it must be fought. Whether it's tribalism in private sector, it must be fought.
You've spoken as well about the importance of entrenching our cultures, respecting them, respecting the languages associated with them. But difference has been the mechanism to entrench division in our country for a very long time. How do we prevent that lack of mythologizing, which difference often results in?
I like your question. You know what I think about difference? There is dignity in our differences. There's dignity in the different languages we have, and the cultures we have, and the religions we have. So we must accept the dignity which is there. I used the word tapestry, but I think the stronger word is dignity.
I want to ask you about the issue of the youth and listening to the youth. That's not something commonly said on Heritage Day. Many people say, look to the past for the answers. And yet you, in a way, are speaking about the importance of young people wanting to decolonize public spaces, including institutions of learning. And you're talking about youngsters mounting a campaign to resist their African cultures being assimilated into Eurocentric culture. Tell us why you have such respect for this youth campaign.
I think the youth are defining their own frontiers as human beings, and they must be allowed to do so. You could not say that we all had the wisdom and all the wisdom forever in 1994. There are shortcomings, and the youth is pointing out those shortcomings in terms of transformation issues, in terms of whether or not they should have access to free education. And you could criticize them, but they have the right to raise those issues. And I respect the youth's right to do so. We need to decolonize education thoroughly and decolonize our social cohesion, the way we relate to each other, the way we do things. It must be decolonized. The era of assimilados, as the Portuguese colonialists called it, and assimilés, as the French, when they colonized Africa, called Africans, who, because they thought they were educated, they were removed from their own people, is gone. Africa does not need such Africans as leaders or as people among themselves, who see themselves as being more equal than equal.
Let's talk about that. I want to explore this issue of colonization and the way different countries did it. Yeah. I mean, you've pointed out very astutely the way Britain colonized was quite different to the way the French and the Portuguese colonized, for example. And perhaps we cannot move forward to decolonization until we've understood those two different types.
Well, colonization is always an oppression of a majority by a minority in most cases. That's how the form is taken. And of course with an intention to loot their resources and all sorts of things. But if you look at Rwanda, the colonizing power there took the Twas, the smallest of all the tribes between the Tutsis and Hutus, and made them governors. The king of the Twa was ruling there. But later then, of course, brought in the Tutsis to be the policemen, the nurses, the cutting edge of colonialism. Created tensions, and I don't know if today those countries have healed, even Burundi. If you take the Francophone countries, the most educated blacks were called assimilés, which means even if they were black, they now became French. And they must live in Paris and become very French and behave and dress like French men and women. The Portuguese colonists, they call them assimilados. And some of the educated blacks aspire to be assimilados, they aspire to be white, black Portuguese. And they wouldn't live in the colonial countries, they lived in in Portugal and spoke Portuguese like any white Portuguese person. Got away, removed from their own people. Africa must move back to its own roots. If I'm an African, I'm an African. My Africanity must be affirmed and asserted. But not as an exclusive, arrogant Africanity. It must be respectful of anybody who's not like what do you call an African. But today, of course, if we want to define an African, it's anyone who lives in Africa who accepts that this is their home.
I must ask you about those of us living in former British colonies, and due to the nature of colonization here. How is it that we move towards a better sense of ourselves, a better sense of our identity and heritage, and a better future for ourselves, given that we have lived under this veil of oppression for so long that has told us we're not good enough to rule ourselves successfully?
Yeah, but if you look at the Freedom Charter from the beginning, it was asserting that people are all equal, that their cultures, their languages, their religions are all equal. And the ANC, of course, continued to propagate that approach until today. And it's still an aspiration which we must realize. That's why now and then there's an outcry when anybody manifests he himself or herself in a racist manner, or anti-gender, or discriminating against other people of different sexes. It's a struggle. I asked the MEC of Education of Gauteng on Sunday, what does he think are the solutions, for example, from his experience at the Pretoria High School? And we agree that it's education. And education, it's a process. is tedious. It's sometimes nauseous, if you allow me to use that word. But it means it takes long to educate a nation. But let's just flag this. Education is the only way we can educate people not to be racist, not to discriminate against others. Because when they're not educated, they become like barbarians and savages.
Dr. Phosa, I've got to, you've touched on such an important point, because this is a point I wanted to raise with you, the issue of education, the issue of literature in schools and our children's exposure to literature that does not fully help them to create a sense of self or locate themselves within the world, because it doesn't reflect their experience largely in many ways. How important is that literature in informing the kind of young South Africans we want to lead us in the future?
I think it's very important before we even look at the children that we the adults must write new literature which reflect the past, the present, and forecasts the future. We need to do that. Otherwise, we're going to read the work written by Bernard Shaw and William Shakespeare, which is very much out of our experiences. You have to imagine that experience to be able to become a genius. But if you have to read literature written by Sidney Spamler, Oswald Muchali, James Mathews, and others, even if some Celia somewhere, it's about you, it's about your history. We must write and teach those that history with pride. Again, not look down upon our own writings.
Dr. Mathews Phosa, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Have a great Heritage Day.
Thank you very much. You too have a happy Heritage Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.